Hello, everyone. Today with us, we have Zina Kumok from Conscious Coins, who paid off $28,000 in debt in only 3 years. Zina, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being on. So I'm excited to hear your story. I know a little bit about it, but how did you get into $28,000 in debt in the first place?
So all my debt was from student loans. I went to a state school, but it was an out-of-state school, so the tuition was still pretty high. And I had scholarships, but my parents, couldn't pay the full amount. So I took out loans to cover the rest.
Gotcha. Now, before we go into like the loan aspect, what did the scholarship situation look like? Because I think some people think like, hey, shouldn't you be able to pay for your school with scholarships? What was your scenario?
Yeah, I want to say tuition was about 30 grand a year when I went to Indiana University, and I had about 7 grand in scholarships every year. And then my parents kicked in 15 grand per year, which was so very generous of them. And then I took out the rest in student loans.
Gotcha. And that seems very relatable. I mean, I know a lot of people probably listening or watching are saying, yeah, I can relate to getting those student loans. But what made you want to decide to like pay them off early? Why wouldn't you just pay
You
like
know,
pay the payments forever?
it's funny. I grew up in a house of Dave Ramsey worshipers, and my parents were on the baby steps. So I just really felt this intense pressure, and not from them. They were never like, you have to pay off your loans really quickly. But I just felt like they were holding me back so much. And the funny thing I graduated in 2011. So when I do the math of if I had put all that extra money in the stock market, like the returns would have been so much better than what I saved on interest. Not that anyone could have known at that time that it would be like one of the great bull market runs in history. So I always tell my story with don't necessarily do what I did. Like financially, I probably would have made out better if I had done more investing because I was not really investing much during that time. But I also just felt all this anxiety about having my loans, which I think a lot of people can relate to. Like it just feels like this really heavy thing that's on your mind all the time.
I think that's a really good point as far as like that's why they call it personal finance, right? Like
Hmm.
personally, how does debt affect you? And you
Yeah.
make a decision based off of what's going to be best for you and your family. And that sounds like what you did. And obviously, you might have had some external influences or pressures there. Um, but what were some things that you did during that time to pay it off quickly?
I mean, the first thing, and everyone's going to roll their eyes, but the first thing I did was make a budget. And I had tried budgeting before my senior year of college when I realized, like, oh crap, I'm going to graduate soon. I really got to figure this, finance thing out. And budgeting was really hard and I was really bad at it. Um, but when I got out of school, and it was very much like, I'm on my own, like, I'm not getting financial support from my parents. I'm just responsible for my own life. And I was only making $28,000 at the time, and I didn't have any roommates because I was living in a city where I didn't know anyone. So I was very much like I had to track my finances. I had like no savings, so I really had to budget, and I had to account for like every single dollar. Like if I went to Redbox to rent a DVD, I would literally like sit there and be like, okay, now where does this $1 like fit in my overall spending plan? I don't know if you need to be that neurotic about it, but when you have limited funds, like I think sometimes you kind of have to just look at like where's your money going? Like where is every dollar going? And it can be very stressful, but it is a huge part of the reason why I was able to pay off the loan so quickly. Um, and then, and another thing that I did was try to find ways to earn more money. That was a little tough because I at first was a newspaper reporter and my hours were kind of wonky. So I tried getting a second job, but it just like would not fit with my full-time schedule. But then eventually I got into doing some more freelance writing work, which really I think kind of helped accelerate the debt payoff process. But the biggest thing I always tell everyone is, it wasn't getting a better job with a higher salary. It was moving in with my then boyfriend and a mutual friend of ours and really slashing my housing expenses. Like when you're on your own for rent, utilities, internet, streaming, like all of that versus splitting those bills with two other people, that makes a huge difference.
Yeah, I mean, house hacking, as we kind of refer to it, is like how do you figure out how to create less expenses when it comes to your living situation? Sound like that was a huge win for you. On the making money side, are there some things that you did do, like little side hustles here and there, to make some extra money?
Yeah, at first, like I remember, like, going on Reddit, going on the internet, saying, like, okay, what can I do from home in my free time? And I would take those surveys where you could like make a few bucks. But it really wasn't until I was able to do more freelance writing that I was really able to make like real money as a side hustle. And then that side hustle turned into the career that I've had for 8.5 years. Um, and that's always what I tell people. Like, it's not the side hustle that's like getting you a few bucks at a time. It's what unique skill do you have that you can leverage to make, some real money on the side? Like, are you a decent graphic designer? Like, are you like a web developer? Can you tutor kids in Spanish? Like, what unique skill do you have that you can charge a premium for and make more money? So that's what I always tell people. Like, don't go for the low hanging fruit that anyone can do. Like, anyone can drive for Lyft or deliver food for Uber Eats. Like, think about what you can bring to the table because that's what's going to get you a higher side hustle income.
Yeah, let's talk about kind of that career transition. So you said you were a newspaper reporter, kind of had a wonky schedule. You discover freelance writing. How do you figure out how to charge for that? Where did you find clients?
It's a bit of a kind of a long road, as I think a lot of career changes are, especially if you're becoming self-employed. I was a newspaper reporter for a year, and then I got a job doing communications at a nonprofit, and I was really happy there. I was there for close to 3 years, and when I started paying off my student loans, I thought, you know what, I'm going to document this. Like, I'm going to start a blog and just document my journey and write about like what I learned, my mistakes, my successes, just to keep myself accountable publicly. Like, if you talk about it publicly, I think people that can then like ask you how it's going, and it's just a little bit of external motivation. Um, and I started my first blog was actually for my newspaper. Like, we were all encouraged to do a blog for the newspaper. And so I thought, okay, well, this is just what I'll blog about because it's what I was interested in. And then I kind of discovered I'm spending more time doing this than what I'm actually supposed to be covering for the actual paper. And that was kind of like my first clue that something I'm interested in. And then when I started working at the nonprofit, I just started my own blog and like on my own domain. Um, and it wasn't until I went to FinCon, which is where I met you, Deacon, this personal finance conference where I met people who were freelance writing full time. And I couldn't believe that they were like doing that full time as a living and making so much more money than me. Um, and I just, got referrals and got connected with people. And at the time, I was already like on my student loan journey. And I think having that personal experience combined with a reporting background made it easier to find clients because I had some credentials. And then just meeting people who would share, like, well, this is how much you should charge, or this is how much this client pays. So, really having that community behind me was really helpful.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. And I think for people listening and say, I love what you talked about on the side hustle, which is like, hey, what value do you have? What skills do you have that you can add in the side hustle world to make you extra money, not just the bare minimum. But then you kind of took that from a career perspective. You're like, okay, well, I'm a news reporter. I'm blogging for them. I can do this for myself. Oh, and by the way, I could write for other people, right? So you're now taking this and
Yeah.
multiplying kind of your skill set. But if someone says, okay, can you make a full-time living freelance writing? Because some people might say, is that just a hobby?
I always tell people that it's completely possible to make a full-time living freelance writing, but it also depends on like, what are your expenses? What do you need to, like, how much do you need to make every month? And B, what do you want to write about? If you're trying to make a full-time living doing movie reviews, it's going to be a lot harder because there's so many people who want to do that, who think it's fun, who enjoy that. So the bar is set a lot, like it's a lot higher to do that as a full-time writer, I think, and have that financial success and stability. Um, Freelance writing and writing about personal finance, I think it's easier in some ways to make a full-time income because the money is just already there in that industry. Like fintech is just a profitable industry, and there are companies that pay a really good wage for freelance writers. Is you have to be talking about and be interested in doing it. A lot of people might look at what I write about and think that's really boring. I don't want to do that. I have no interest. And for them, it might be a lot harder to get to break in because it's just not something that they find interesting. Um, but writing about healthcare is also very profitable. I think a lot of B2B topics are doing that. It's really like writing about, like, I think pop culture, which sounds really fun. I think that can be harder to break into. So it really just depends on the specific niche that you're interested in and if you can actually write. I think a lot of people think they can write, and there's obviously like a level of quality. Having that journalism background really, really helped me and prepared me. And when I was a newspaper reporter, I did a lot of sports reporting and I did a lot of um, cops reporting. And both of those things you have to write very quickly because it's breaking news. It's got to be out there as quick as possible. So learning to write with speed also increases my hourly rate because I don't take as long to write as maybe other writers do.
Sure, sure. Now, when you were paying off your debt, all right, so you've got, some freelance stuff on the side, you're checking out ways to make extra money, you're watching every dollar. Do you hit any roadblocks on the way?
I definitely had things come up that I think everyone experiences, whether that's like having to get your windshield replaced, I had a lot of car expenses at that time because I was in a long distance relationship. So I was spending a lot of money on gas, putting a lot of wear and tear on my car. Um, I know I had like some medical bills come up. So I wouldn't say I had anything major where I was out of work, like I got laid off or anything. I didn't have any dependents. I didn't have any kids. Um, that makes it a lot easier.
Hmm.
As I'm sure you know, like having kids is a huge expense. I'm sure I know if I had those, I would not, my financial priorities would have been a lot different. So maybe that's another reason why it's good to try to like knock out your debt before you do that because it is just so much harder. Um, yeah, so I wouldn't say I experienced like any really big roadblocks, but just the normal things of like, okay, well now you got to move to a new city. Moving is really expensive. Now you got to put up a security deposit, or now you gotta like get all your car repairs done. So not anything crazy or totally abnormal.
Well, but what I would say is, based on what you told me, if you're making 28 grand a year and you're moving someplace, that's, I don't know if we call it a roadblock, but it's something where you're like, oh, where am I going to come up with that money? Right. Because you're already watching every dollar, or even a windshield, right? I don't know if it's 300-500 bucks. You're like, so how do you address those situations, especially when you're trying to pay off debt?
So I will say I really worked on getting my emergency fund set up before I started paying off my loans quickly. Like I paid the minimum until I had my emergency fund set up because, the newspaper industry is very volatile. I think it's probably worse now than it was then, but it was still really bad then. Like I had so many friends getting laid off randomly, and they didn't have really nice, generous severance packages the way you might in another industry. So I was very aware of I have to get my emergency fund set up first. Like I don't want to be crawling back to my parents saying, "Hey, I need to buy, a timing belt on my car. Like, can I borrow a few bucks?" And I especially knew like if I lose my job, it could take me a while to find a new one. Um, so that was huge. Like getting that emergency fund was really the solid foundation that I needed. So yeah, like that's what I would dip into if I had something that came up and I needed to find a way to pay for it.
Awesome. Now okay, so you paid off your debt. You've got this extra cash flow, right? Because you're making extra payments on your student loans. What'd you do with your money then?
I think then I really started funneling it into investing and like kind of making up for those years when I really wasn't. Um, I then also beefed up my emergency fund because that's when I decided to become a full time freelance writer. So I knew I wanted to have a bigger cushion. And the unfortunate part of being self employed is that you are now responsible for paying, double the payroll taxes. So even if you are making more money, there's also a higher tax obligation than if you're working, for a traditional company and you're a W-2 employee. Health insurance also comes with that. Like if you're self-employed, you're going to have a higher health insurance premium. Um, so, and then another thing was I paid off my loans, and then basically not long after that, my husband and I moved to Denver, which had a way higher cost of living than the Midwest. So that took care of a lot of the problem of having extra money.
Yeah, but you put yourself in a good position, right? You paid off your debt, so you had less cash flow that you needed to pay out. Then you fully funded your emergency fund, or you beefed it up, as you said. And so you were in a position that if you guys wanted to live someplace that was a higher cost of living, you could, right? Could you imagine what if you had those student loans still and you didn't have the emergency fund and you're like, hey, let's go move someplace more expensive? That could have been a strain on you guys. Um, so
Yeah.
if people are saying, okay, I'm at step one, and you said, okay, obviously budgeting is the place to start. But other than
Mhm.
budgeting, what would you say is some tips that you have for people that are looking to pay off some debt in a short period of time?
I definitely think work on increasing your income, whatever that looks like. Some people work an hourly job where they can get overtime if they need it. Um, Maybe that means looking to get a promotion or moving to a company with a higher salary. Uh, there is there's a limit on how much you can save from your budget. Like there's a cap on, okay, I need this amount of money to live. And there's also things people want to do. Like they want to get a gym membership. They want to pay for streaming. They want to, eat healthy and have fun and travel. So there's like a floor to how much you can cut from your budget before you're just miserable and eating rice and beans. But there's not really there is technically a limit on how much you can make, but that limit is so much higher. So I always tell people like focus on increasing your income. That might mean going back to school temporarily to get maybe like another degree, another certification. That's also a possibility. It might mean figuring out, okay, well, I'm in this industry now. Can I parlay my skills into a higher paying industry? Um, I feel like what a lot of frugal bloggers and experts get wrong is that they focus so much on saving like a dollar here and there and not so much on, okay, well, how do I increase my hourly rate so I'm not making 30 bucks an hour, I'm making 40 bucks an hour. Like that is what has real huge positive benefits. Not that you shouldn't budget and watch your expenses, but I think more people don't focus on increasing your income because it's not as easy as like, all right, we'll just cut back on eating out. Boom, done. That's simple. It's not simple to increase your income in a substantial way.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that the income side is what a lot of people don't focus on enough, but that is what's going to give them the biggest, advantage to paying it off faster. Is because if you can find a gig that's going to pay you. I was doing these conferences for a buddy of mine when we were paying off our
Mhm.
house, and he would pay me $1,000 for a weekend. Like I don't, there's not a lot of gigs that I know will pay you $1,000 in a weekend. But if you find that it was a one-off thing, working at this food conference, manning a booth, and it was like 3 days, so it's like $300 a day or whatever it was. It was like that helped me pay off my debt so much faster than just saying, hey, how can I cut $10 out of my budget this month? But
Yeah.
to your point, yeah, you still got to do it. You got to look at it and say, hey, how can I make this line smaller, for each line item on your budget? But after that, it's like, okay, what can I do to focus on the income? Let's fast forward a little bit. So you paid off your debt, you funded your emergency fund, you've moved a couple times because you moved to Colorado
Yeah.
and then you moved back to Indiana. What's your financial picture look like now?
Now I am just continuing to be self-employed, continue to save for retirement. I am not part of the fire movement. I feel like a lot of people assume if you're involved in the personal finance space, then you're automatically trying to retire early. Um, I think I spent so much of my life like laser focused on this one financial goal that now I'm just kind of like, I feel like a regular middle class person just enjoying life. And I'm happy to spend money on a personal trainer or traveling abroad or, going out to dinner with friends and, still living within my means, but just really enjoying things and having a geriatric dog with very expensive medication and just really prioritizing like, okay, well, what makes me happy and how do I want to spend my money and, really enjoying that and having a house that I hope to die in someday. But not necessarily like, okay, well, if I just save aggressively for the next 10 years, I won't have to work at all. Like, I'm not really on that path, even though I think a lot of people like want that path. Like, I try not to get burnt out in my work so that this can be a sustainable job for the long term just because it is so flexible and convenient and right now it's like perfect for the lifestyle I have.
Yeah, I think a lot of people can relate to that. Not everybody's like, "Hey, I want to pinch every penny so that I can retire early." Some people are like, I just want to enjoy life and live below my means so that I can, travel, spend time with family, the geriatric dog, whatever it might be. And so I think that there's paths for everybody. I think retiring early sometimes can be the worst thing that people do. I've had many stories where people do that and then they don't find purpose in meeting anymore. And so it's one of those things where it's like, okay, less about the retiring early and more about setting yourself up financially well so that you can have options, right? You have options. Now
Yes.
you paid off your debt. Now that you have a flexible job, you can do a lot of things that you maybe couldn't do before because your news reporting job had you restricted hour wise because your finances had you restricted. Now you're in a much better position. And so congrats for doing that, Zina. What's the latest thing that you're working on?
I would love to get to coast fire soon. I don't think I'm quite there yet, but I don't think that's too far off. Um, but other than that, yeah, like I just wanna. When we lived in Denver, it was I was building the freelance writing, and Denver was so expensive, and I eventually did have a lot of medical stuff come up that when you're self-employed and have to pay for it, health insurance and medical bills is very expensive. I think it was about as much as my down payment on a house. So that took a lot of energy financially. But now, yeah, I think we're just kind of in a good spot. So just yeah, trying to travel abroad at least like every couple years, and just really enjoying that part of like still being young enough and having energy and having the desire and inclination, the freedom. So that's really nice.
Yeah, and for those that are listening that don't know what Coast Fire is, can you break that down for us?
So as I understand it, coast fire is when you have enough invested that if you did not put another penny in, you would still be able to retire when you want to,
Yeah,
which
that's
is a
awesome.
really powerful thing to have to know that, okay, let's say something goes horribly wrong with my job. I can't invest the same way as I used to. Like you're still good. And then if you do keep contributing, then maybe you can retire like a little bit or early, or you just will be able to maybe have like a bougier retirement or leave like a bigger legacy when you die. So it's it's options. Like I feel like money just gives you options.
For sure. And who doesn't want a bougie retirement? I mean, that sounds great to me. Well, Zina, if people really connected with your story and they want to kind of keep in touch or follow you, where's the best place for them to find you?
So you can find me in my blog, www.consciouscoins.com. I also have a YouTube channel, Conscious Coins, and you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Just look up Zina Kumok or Conscious Coins.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today, Zina.
Yeah, thanks for having me.